he decided to sign an executive order called Executive Order 9066, and it defined the conditions. That is, the local military have the authority to remove people, and it did not name Japanese or Germans or Italians. It simply say, the president giving authority to remove. Well, there happened to be 5 military districts in the U.S. at the time. There was the Eastern, Central, Southern, Western, and Hawaii Pacific. 4 out of the 5 military generals decided not to exercise the authority. So the people of Japanese, German, Italian ancestry were allowed to stay there and stay at home. But the people of Japanese ancestry were singled out by the Western Section general, name is John DeWitt, Lieutenant General John DeWitt. And it turns out he hated Japanese. He really hated Japanese. And he didn't hate Germans and Italians, but he certainly hated Japanese. So he decided that all Japanese, even partial Japanese children with mixed parents, shall be removed and placed into prison under guard. And that's where the great massive move took place. They built the camp like here in Heart Mountain in 3 months. And I remember the train, the prison train that removed us from San Francisco, and eventually wound up, and I set foot for the first time here at Heart Mountain. So clearly, we were denied our rights in that process. But it turns out during the war, around the 1943-44 time period, the government decided we need more people in the military to serve. And they thought, there's a pool of able-bodied people in the camps. So they came and asked for volunteers to join the military. And it turns out the source of most of the volunteers was in Hawaii, people were not imprisoned. And in fact, Hawaii is such a large number, they created a new unit called 442nd Regimental Combat Team, very famous unit, won many commendations throughout the war. But when they came to the continental US and they went to the camps, very few people from the camps volunteered. In fact, at Heart Mountain, there was some 800, there was closer to 2,000 eligible young people of military age. About 800 were specifically asked to join. And no more than a few dozen volunteered. And that was typical response from the other camps. Now, as a result, the government decided to institute a draft. So the military draft came to Heart Mountain and all of the camps. Now, the government knew they only wanted loyal Japanese Americans. I mean, it would be a disaster if there were any disloyals among them joining the military. I mean, that could really cause a problem. We talk about espionage and sabotage. Having disloyal people would be bad. And therefore, the government decided to give an examination, a test of everyone over the age of 17. And that test consisted primarily of 2 questions. The first question it's officially called question number 27. And that question was, would you be willing to join the military if asked? If you answered yes, you're considered loyal. If you answered no, or you refuse to answer, you're considered disloyal. Question 28 was even more severe, and it asked the question, would you, basically it said, would you give up your allegiance to the Emperor of Japan? And that's an awful question, because a lot of people, especially those who were born in the US, never had an allegiance to Japan. I mean, they were not immigrants, they were born here. And so if you answered yes, that would be a lie, because that would mean that you used to have allegiance to Japan. And if you answered no, that's not correct either, because that also says you used to have allegiance to Japan. So a lot of people said, you know, what kind of a question is that? I can't answer that. Well, the government decided to take all of the people who answered no, and there were 2 no's. If you answered no, they labeled these people no-nos. And they were all shipped off to a special camp in Northern California called Tule Lake, near the border of Oregon, a remote, desolate place. And it was very, very high secure. They had tanks and machine guns and secure fencing, make sure no one escaped. It was a brutal place, but the no-nos were sent there. Also, people who elected to return to Japan, those of us who came from Japan, the immigrants, had the ability to claim they would like to return. So those people also were sent to Tule Lake. So there was a large number of people who moved to Tule Lake. Well, when the draft finally came to the people at Har Mountain, as well as other camps, what happened was it started with a group of one person, one individual by the name Kiyoshi Okamoto. He was about 55 years old, a Nisei, second generation. He decided, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to join, because the government took away my rights, my civil rights. The government imprisoned my family. And the same government is asking me to join the military. And unless the government restores my civil right, allows me and my family to return back to my home, I'm not going to serve this country. So he got on a bandwagon and he started making speeches in the camp, and built up, another person and then another person. It suddenly built up, and they went around to different mess halls. I remember a gathering after dinner of these people having a meeting and loud voices. And people like Okamoto and others would describe the conditions and their philosophy that we should not serve until our rights were restored. And that kept building up until there was some 85 Japanese Americans in the camp at Har Mountain who took the active step that when the draft came, they decided not to go and board buses to go to a physical examination, which is the first step in the draft process. Well, upon hearing that, the government immediately filed the accusation that these people were violating the draft laws, and a criminal trial, a federal court in Cheyenne, Wyoming, was created to house, the largest ever trial jury trial in Wyoming. And it turns out they had, the people were represented by an attorney who figured out it's better to have a trial by judge instead of a jury because of the feeling that the people around the area would be highly biased against the Japanese. And it turned out that was a bad mistake. It was a huge mistake because the judge, the name is Judge Kennedy, turned out to be a racist. He had a history of racism in his career that goes way back. But of course, the accused and the lawyer representing the accused had no idea of his background. And so it didn't take long for the Judge Kennedy to decide everyone's guilty. And they were shipped off to a regular federal prison. The more senior leaders of the group shipped to Fort Leavenworth. And the rest of the group, most of the group, younger people, were shipped to federal prison in McNeil Island in the state of Washington. And they were held there. They were sentenced for a period between 3 to 5 years. And they were held there for 3 years, even after the war ended. And it was not until President Truman signed a pardon for everyone who was convicted at these trials. And so they were allowed to return, get back to a normal living as best possible, and try to get back to normal conditions. What's significant is to show that the intent was not to forever avoid the draft, avoid serving in the military. The intent was to make sure that once the civil rights were restored, that we will be able to serve the military, serve the government. Because it turns out several of my friends, and one in particular, a fellow named Dr. Takashi Hoshizaki, is a good example, because even after he returned from home, from the prison, when the Korean War came about, he joined. And now that his civil rights were restored, he felt very comfortable and willingly joined the military to participate in that effort. And similarly, many of my friends during the Vietnam War had a similar response. So it proves the point that under certain situations, like massive denial of one's most fundamental civil right, to take steps like resistance can be and should be applied until those civil rights were restored. So that was a very, very important lesson that was learned from this process. And hopefully everyone in this country who is an American citizen knows that they have that very fundamental right and should remember it and never to forget it.